1:29 AM Western Greenland Time. Pituffik Space Base sits on a gravel promontory on the northwestern coast of Greenland at 76 degrees north latitude, 1,200 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle, 770 kilometers north of the northern tip of Baffin Island, 4,900 kilometers from Moscow. For 73 years it was known as Thule Air Base, the name it carried through the Cold War as the northern anchor of the distant early warning line, then as the host of the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System's primary radar complex, then as a satellite tracking and space surveillance station whose contribution to U.S. strategic warning capability made it one of the 5 most militarily significant fixed installations in the world regardless of the geopolitical era. The Danish-American Defense Agreement that governed Pituffik's operation had been in continuous force since 1951. The base had been resupplied by air through the Arctic winter for 7 decades, maintained by a rotating garrison whose members accepted the polar night, the extreme cold, and the geographic isolation as the operational conditions of their assignment. The garrison at 1:29 AM numbered 381 personnel: Space Force operators, Air Force support crews, civilian contractors, and the 143 soldiers of the Army Patriot battery that had arrived 8 days earlier. 381 people at 76 degrees north latitude in January darkness, at a facility that had never been struck by a hostile weapon in its entire operational history. The 73-year record was about to end. The base sat on territory administered by the autonomous Danish territory of Greenland. Denmark was a NATO founding member. The defense of Pituffik was therefore a NATO Article 5 obligation. An attack on the base was an attack on the alliance, not merely on the United States. This legal framework had been the diplomatic protection of the base for 7 decades, under the assumption that no adversary would find the cost-benefit calculus of attacking a NATO ally's territory acceptable. At 1:29 AM on a January night when the surface temperature at Pituffik was minus 38 degrees Celsius and the sun had not risen in 47 days and would not rise for another 23. That assumption encountered its first operational test. The Kalibr-NK cruise missiles that had been launched from a Yasen-M class submarine in the Davis Strait, 740 kilometers southwest of Pituffik, in international waters between Greenland and Baffin Island, had been in flight for 53 minutes when the AN/FP-S-123 EVORAD radar at Pituffik detected them. Not the launch, not the transit. The terminal approach. The Kalibr-NK's sea-skimming transit profile flying at 15 meters altitude over the frozen Davis Strait and then transitioning to a terrain-following approach over the Greenland ice sheet's coastal margin had placed the missiles below the radar horizon for the majority of their 53-minute flight. The first radar return was at 22 kilometers. At 800 kilometers per hour, 22 kilometers was 99 seconds. 14 Kalibr-NK cruise missiles. 99 seconds from first radar detection to minimum range CIWS engagement. The base's defensive posture at 1:29 AM was the product of a threat assessment that had been elevated for 19 days following a U.S. intelligence report characterizing anomalous Yasen-M submarine activity in the Davis Strait as consistent with weapons pre-positioning rather than routine patrol. The assessment had resulted in the deployment of a Patriot PAC-3 MSE battery from Fort Wainwright in Alaska, an airlift of 4 PAC-3 fire units by C-17 that had arrived 8 days earlier and had been operational since day 4. The Patriot was the first ground-based air defense system deployed to Pituffik in 40 years. It was not designed for 22-kilometer terminal detection. Patriot's engagement capability against a cruise missile with 99 seconds available was constrained by the engagement timeline. The PAC-3 interceptor's effective engagement envelope against a Kalibr-NK at cruise speed required a minimum acquisition and track time that the 99-second window barely satisfied. The Patriot Fire Control Officer had 4 seconds from the radar return to first interceptor release if she wanted maximum engagement depth. She had been watching the 22-kilometer returns for 11 seconds before she had full track confidence. 15 seconds. The window to engage before the Kalibr-NKs entered minimum range CIWS territory was 15 seconds from full track confidence. She fired at 1:29 a.m. and 26 seconds. The CIWS system at Pituffik, a Phalanx unit that had been forward deployed from Naval Station Rota 6 days after the Patriot arrived, was simultaneously activating on the same radar returns. The Phalanx at Pituffik was operating in conditions that its design team had never fully optimized for: minus 38 degrees ambient temperature, ice crystal precipitation that created clutter on its fire control radar, and sea surface ice that reduced the contrast between a cruise missile flying at 15 meters and the background return from the frozen Davis Strait below it. The Phalanx operator had spent 4 days calibrating the system's cold weather parameters to account for the thermal environment. He had never had a live engagement to validate those calibrations against. He was about to. The calibration log he had built over 4 days at Pituffik documented 11 separate parameter adjustments to the Phalanx's fire control software. Adjustments to the thermal signature differential thresholds, the clutter rejection algorithms for ice crystal precipitation, the sea surface return filtering for partially frozen water, and the engagement prioritization logic for multiple simultaneous tracks approaching from a single bearing. The manufacturer's documentation had a cold weather operations section that covered down to minus 25 degrees. Pituffik at minus 38 was 13 degrees below the documentation's lower bound. He had extrapolated from first principles and from conversations with 2 engineers at the manufacturer's technical support line who had been cautiously helpful within the constraints of what they could say on an unsecured phone call. The calibration was his best estimate. He believed it was correct. He was about to find out. The first PAC-3 interceptor cleared its launch canister at 1:29 a.m. and 26 seconds and was supersonic within 2.2 seconds. The Kalibr-NK formation was closing at 800 kilometers per hour from the northwest. The engagement geometry gave the first PAC-3 a calculated intercept probability against the lead Kalibr of 71% at this detection range and engagement timeline. Lower than the system's nominal performance because the detection range had compressed the available engagement time below optimal parameters. 3 PAC-3 rounds were in flight by 1:29 a.m. and 42 seconds. Each targeted a separate Kalibr track in the formation's leading edge. The first intercept confirmed at 1:29 a.m. and 57 seconds. The lead Kalibr neutralized at 11 kilometers from the base perimeter. The second intercept confirmed at 1:30 a.m. The second Kalibr neutralized at 8 kilometers. The third, PAC-3, missed. The thermal signature of the third Kalibr, flying at 15 meters over the ice surface, was partially masked by the cold temperature inversion layer that the calibration work had not fully compensated for. The PAC-3's seeker lost lock in the final 400 meters of the engagement. The interceptor passed 31 meters below the target. The Kalibr continued inbound. 11 remaining Kalibrs, including the one that had defeated the PAC-3. 61 seconds from first detection. The Patriot fired 4 more rounds. 2 more PAC-3Es and 2 PAC-3 MSE interceptors that provided better seeker performance against the cold temperature signature issue. The 2 MSE interceptors both intercepted their assigned tracks. One of the PAC-3s intercepted its target. One missed, another thermal inversion effect on the seeker in the terminal phase. 7 Kalibrs intercepted. 7 remaining. The Phalanx was already tracking. The Phalanx at Pituffik engaged its first Kalibr track at 1:30 a.m. and 41 seconds, with the formation at 6 kilometers range. At 800 kilometers per hour, 6 kilometers was 27 seconds to the base perimeter. The 20mm rotary cannon cycled at 4,500 rounds per minute against the 7 inbound tracks. The Phalanx's engagement against 7 simultaneous tracks at close range pushed it to its designed maximum throughput. In normal operating temperatures with a standard thermal signature differential between target and background, the system's engagement probability against a single Kalibr-NK at 6 kilometers was assessed at 87%. In minus 38 degrees with ice crystal precipitation and thermal inversion affecting the fire control solution quality, the operator's 4-day calibration work had produced an estimated performance of 74%. 5 of the 7 were neutralized by Phalanx between 1:30 a.m. and 1:31 a.m. 2 were not. The first of the 2 penetrators impacted the EVORAD radar building at 1:31 a.m., the same building whose radar return had been the first to detect the inbound formation 99 seconds earlier. The radar building sustained direct impact from the Kalibr's 450-kilogram warhead. The primary EVORAD array was rendered non-operational. The building's structural shell survived, reinforced concrete construction that had been specified in the facility's Cold War-era hardening. But the radar electronics and the thermal management systems required to keep them operational at minus 38 degrees were non-functional. The backup radar, a smaller AN/TEEP EY2 unit that had been deployed alongside the Patriot battery 8 days earlier, was in a hardened shelter 280 meters from the EVORAD building. It was undamaged. It came online as the primary sensor for the base defense network at 1:31 a.m. and 43 seconds. 43 seconds after the EVORAD impact. 43 seconds during which Pituffik's radar picture had been provided entirely by the Phalanx's own fire control radar at short range. The second penetrator targeted the airfield's primary parking apron. The same apron where 3 C-17 aircraft that had delivered the Patriot battery 8 days earlier had been waiting for cleared weather to depart. 2 of the 3 C-17S had departed 48 hours earlier. 1 remained on the apron, grounded by a hydraulic system issue that the maintenance team had been working for 3 days. The Kalibr's terminal guidance had been targeted on the apron's infrared signature. The heat from the maintenance hangar where crews had been working on the C-17 overnight in the base's enclosed, heated workspace. The warhead impacted 18 meters from the C-17's nose section. The blast radius of a 450-kilogram warhead at 18 meters from a grounded aircraft was definitively within lethal structural damage range. The C-17's port wing route was structurally compromised by the blast and fragment pattern. The aircraft was assessed as non-recoverable without depot-level maintenance. 4 maintenance crew in the hangar at the time of impact received blast and fragment injuries. 2 moderate, 2 minor. All 4 were ambulatory and reached the base medical facility under their own capability within 8 minutes of the impact. 2 Kalibrs had reached their targets. 12 had been neutralized. The base's primary radar was non-operational. 1 aircraft was non-recoverable. The Patriot battery, the CIWS, and the AN/TPY-2 backup radar were all operational. The Yasen-M submarine in the Davis Strait had not surfaced. It was not required to surface to launch Kalibr-NK missiles. The vertical launch system fired from depth. Whether it was repositioning for a second salvo, withdrawing, or holding station was not immediately accessible. The P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft that had been on airborne alert over the Labrador Sea diverted to the Davis Strait search corridor at 1:32 a.m. Its sonobuoy deployment would begin providing contact data within 42 minutes. The F-35A aircraft of the 354th Fighter Wing at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska and the Norwegian F-35As at Evans had been on elevated alert status since the Davis Strait submarine anomaly assessment 19 days earlier. Eielson to Pituffik was 3,700 kilometers, well beyond the F-35A's unrefueled combat radius. Any F-35A response package would require KC-135 or KC-46 tanker support from Elmendorf or Thul's own fuel infrastructure. Thul's fuel infrastructure was intact. The tanker coordination request was transmitted to Air Mobility Command at 1:35 a.m. The tanker availability window from Elmendorf placed the F-35As over Davis Strait not earlier than 4:30 a.m., 3 hours after the strike, more than sufficient time for the Virginia's engagement to have resolved the immediate threat source but relevant to any assessment of persistent maritime threat in the strait. Both bases received the Pituffik strike alert at 1:31 a.m. The relevant question for the Counter-Operation Execute package, pre-coordinated under the same NATO Article 5 authorization framework that had been established for the Baltic and Finnish scenarios, was not whether to respond, but where the Yasen-M was and whether it was still in international waters at the time the response was authorized. The P-8's first sonobuoy pattern showed a contact at 1:48 a.m., a passive acoustic signature at depth in the Davis Strait, bearing consistent with a westward transit from the original launch position. The submarine was moving away from Greenland. It was still in international waters. The contact was passed to the Virginia-class submarine that had been repositioning from the Labrador Sea since 1:32 a.m. The Virginia acquired the acoustic contact on its own passive array at 2:01 a.m. The fire control solution development required 27 minutes. The Yasen-M was running deep and fast on battery, generating less acoustic noise than it would at full diesel propulsion. The fire control solution reached engagement confidence at 2:28 a.m. Northcom's response authorization, pre-delegated under the Article 5 engagement framework for confirmed hostile attacks on NATO territory, had been issued at 1:44 a.m. The Virginia's commanding officer had the authorization. He had the solution. At 2:29 a.m., he released a Mk-48ADCAP toward the Yasen-M contact. The Mk-48 acquisition tone was detected by the Yasen-M's passive sonar at 2:31 a.m., 112 seconds after weapon release. The Yasen-M executed an emergency ascent toward the Davis Strait's surface, where the shallow water above the ice-covered strait's pressure ridges created acoustic complexity that degraded the Mk-48's seeker performance. At the surface, the submarine transmitted on the International Maritime Distress Frequency. The Mk-48 acquired the target's acoustic signature through the surface turbulence. The Yasen-M was now at periscope depth over the Davis Strait's partially frozen surface, its hull generating a thermal signature visible against the -6-degree water temperature from the Virginia's own sensors. The weapon's seeker held the contact through the acoustic complexity. Detonation confirmed at 2:34 a.m. The Davis Strait in January was 640 meters deep at the engagement position. The Yasen-M was at periscope depth, approximately 10 meters. The Mk-48 had detonated against a target that had ascended from 340 meters to 10 meters in 180 seconds. The engineering performance of the Yasen-M's emergency ascent, from combat depth to near surface in 3 minutes, would be assessed in detail in the post-engagement technical analysis. It had not been sufficient to change the outcome. It had been fast enough that the crew had reached the surface before the detonation. A USCG cutter operating in the Davis Strait under an independent maritime patrol mission was diverted to the detonation position at 2:37 a.m. Survival conditions in the Davis Strait at -6 degrees water temperature and -23 degrees ambient in January were assessed as survivable for a period of approximately 12 minutes in standard immersion suits. The Yasen-M crew had immersion suits. The USCG cutter's estimated arrival at the detonation position was 31 minutes. At 3:04 a.m., 27 minutes after the detonation, the USCG cutter arrived at the position. The Davis Strait at the detonation coordinates was ice-scattered, partially frozen, and dark. The cutter's search took 11 minutes. At 3:15 a.m., the first survivors were brought aboard. The final survivor count was logged at 3:47 a.m. The number was not published that day. It was classified. The Davis Strait in January was not a survivable environment for long. and 31 minutes was a long time in -6-degree water even with immersion suits. 12 minutes was the estimated survival time without suits. The Yasen-M's crew had suits. The Davis Strait's partially frozen surface had large ice pan sections that could be used as platforms, and the crew had trained for emergency procedures in Arctic waters. Training and immersion suits and ice pans were not certainties. They were the variables that determined a number that would be declassified at some point in the future, as these things eventually were. The USCG cutter's commanding officer transmitted the final survivor count to Northcom at 3:47 a.m. The transmission was encrypted. The number was not published that day. At Pituffik, the maintenance team was already at work on the EVORAD building's structural assessment. The radar was non-operational, but the building had survived, and the engineering assessment at 3:30 a.m. indicated that the primary array's electronics could be replaced within 14 days if the replacement components could be airlifted from Colorado Springs in the weather window that was projected to open in 6 days. 14 days of degraded radar coverage was a specific and manageable vulnerability. The backup AN/TPY-2 remained operational throughout. The Space Force's satellite-based sensor architecture continued providing global launch detection coverage independent of any ground radar. The C-17 on the apron was a total loss for operational purposes. The Air Mobility Command Logistics Team had already been notified. A replacement C-17 from McChord Air Force Base was being prepared for a Pituffik delivery mission as soon as the weather window permitted. The 4 personnel injuries, 2 moderate, 2 minor, were all treated at Pituffik's medical facility and all assessed as stable. The base medical officer transmitted the casualty status report to Northcom at 3:15 a.m. No fatalities. Time from first Kalibr radar detection to end of active defensive engagement, 2 minutes. Time from Kalibr impact on EVORAD to Virginia Fire Control solution confidence, 57 minutes. Time from Fire Control solution confidence to Yasen-M detonation, 6 minutes. Russian weapons employed. 14 Kalibr-NK cruise missiles from Yasen-M, class submarine, Davis Strait, international waters. 1 Yasen-M submarine. Kalibr-NK intercept rate, 85.7%, 12 of 14 neutralized, 7 by PAC-3 and PAC-3 MSE, 5 by Phalanx CIWS. 2 penetrators. Cold weather thermal inversion effects degraded both PAC-3 and Phalanx performance from nominal parameters. Effects: Pituffik. EVORAD, primary radar non-operational. Backup operational, 43-second gap. 1 C-17 structurally compromised on apron. Non-recoverable without depot maintenance. 4 personnel injuries, 2 moderate, 2 minor. All stable. Base operational throughout. Patriot, CIWS, AN/T, PY, 2 backup, communications and logistics infrastructure functional. Yasen-M, non-operational at 2:34 a.m., following Mk-48 engagement in Davis Strait international waters. Crew recovery initiated by USCG cutter, survivors recovered beginning 3:15 a.m. U.S. assets, EVORAD primary radar, 14-day replacement timeline. C-17 total loss, replacement in transit. 4 personnel injuries. Patriot battery fully operational, reduced interceptor ready load. The Russian Federation had struck a NATO installation at 76 degrees north latitude in January darkness and -38-degree temperatures. Conditions that no military strike operation had ever been executed in against a target at that latitude in the post-Cold War period. The cold weather performance degradation had been real and had produced 2 penetrating weapons from a 14-round salvo. The 2 penetrators had taken out the primary radar and 1 grounded aircraft. The backup radar and the Patriot battery and the CIWS were operational. The Yasen-M that had fired the salvo was on the floor of the Davis Strait, The base was operational. The radar would be repaired in 14 days. The C-17 would be replaced. The 4 personnel would recover. The submarine would not be repaired.